Check out carmarshal.com. The link is in the description. They help support us.
Mainstream media now praising Trump as he flip-flops and promises tyrannical gun control. Gun owners and Trump supporters alike are voicing their concern over the president's new push for stricter gun control legislation in the wake of the Florida shooting. By Matt Agorist, February 21, 2018. If there is one thing consistent about President Donald Trump, it is his inconsistencies. Since he was elected, Trump has reneged on promises not to go into Afghanistan, putting America first, and eliminating Obamacare. This was all predictable. However, a recent move this week by the Trump administration has even his most ardent lapdogs crying out. Gun control. After the tragic shooting in Florida last week, Trump took to the limelight to begin banning and controlling. Up first on the agenda was the bump fire stock. It didn't matter at all to the president that the bump fire stock wasn't used in the Florida shooting, but he took to moving to ban it anyway. The White House released a memo Tuesday that indicates Trump has directed the Justice Department to draw up legislation to ban firearm modifiers, including the bump stock used in the Las Vegas massacre. Fox News then confirmed with the DOJ that the department is acting quickly on the president's order. The department understands this is a priority for the president and has acted quickly to move through the rulemaking process, spokesman Sarah Isgur Flores said. We look forward to the results of that process as soon as it is duly completed. This move also got him praise from the Washington Post, who took time out of their day to stop bashing Trump over Russian conspiracy theories and praise him for carrying on his predecessor's move to limit the right of Americans to protect themselves. As WAPO reports, President Trump on Tuesday signaled an openness to modest gun control measures following what he called an evil massacre at a South Florida high school last week that left 17 dead and prompted passionate calls from teenagers for reform. However, the Post went further, alluding to the fact that Trump will likely go further than bump stocks. In private, he has indicated that he might do more, telling advisors and friends in recent days that he is determined to push for some sort of gun control legislation, according to people familiar with the conversations, the Post reported. Trump, himself, even tweeted out that he wants Republicans and Democrats to come together for gun control. 22H. Donald J. Trump. Heavy checkmark. At Real Donald Trump. Bad ratings at CNN and at MSNBC got scammed when they covered the anti-Trump Russia rally wall to wall. They probably knew it was fake news, but, because it was a rally against me, they pushed it hard anyway. Two really dishonest newscasters, but the public is wise. Donald J. Trump. Heavy checkmark. At Real Donald Trump. Whether we are Republican or Democrat, we must now focus on strengthening background checks. 8:18 p.m., February 20, 2018. 68.2K. 34.8K people are talking about this. Twitter adds info and privacy. Axios also reported that Trump has told associates that he doesn't think high school kids should be able to buy guns, and is open to the idea of imposing a minimum purchase age of 21 for guns like those used in the Florida high school massacre. By that logic, Trump should also raise the age of joining the military to 21 too. According to other reports, Trump is also mulling the idea of banning the private sale of guns altogether. This move to push for gun control should come as no surprise. As TFTP reported in December, in an example of how both parties are willing to completely compromise their ostensible principles to further the agenda of usurping your rights, the Republican-controlled House voted to federalize gun laws across the country. Not only was this bill, which makes it easier for the federal government to disarm the citizens, voted for by the alleged pro-Second Amendment Republicans, but it was also supported by the NRA. Justin Amash. Heavy checkmark. At Justin Amash. There are more government-growing, unconstitutional, anti-liberty pieces of legislation moving through the House this month than in any month I can remember. 9:55 a.m., December 5, 2017. 1368. 960 people are talking about this. Twitter adds info and privacy. So why is it that conservatives are freaking and the liberal mainstream media is now praising Trump? Well, Trump, just like every other president in the last 100 years, is subject to the status quo, the ruling elite, and the deep state establishment. The last 3 presidents, in fact, have explicitly run on platforms on non-intervention only to be elected and flip-flop on every one of their promises. The rights of citizens to protect themselves become second chair to the desire of the state to force citizen compliance. Even if Trump was genuine on his promises, there'd be no way he would have ever been able to follow through. The unelected deep state in Washington has simply become far too powerful to be changed, which is why sites like the Free Thought Project, the Anti-Media, Activist Post, We Are Change, Storm Clouds Gathering, The Corbett Report, and others within the alternative media have been predicting this since day one. As is the case after every single time a crazed maniac causes a tragedy using firearms, politicians and their supporters come out of the woodwork to demand Americans give up their guns. Sadly, as is the case every single time, the citizens who support giving up their right to self-defense miss the bigger picture. When law-abiding citizens turn in their guns, only the government and criminals have guns. The irony here is so glaringly ridiculous that it almost hurts. With the exception of the neoconservative tyrant class, most of the people calling for Americans to be disarmed are not supportive of the current administration. Arguably, many of the people calling for Americans to be disarmed are also the ones taking a stand against racist police tactics and brutality. The disconnect happens here. People who dislike Donald Trump and who, rightfully so, call out the problem of police brutality in America, want to give all the guns in the country to Donald Trump and the police. The bottom line is that government, historically speaking, is the most violent entity in the world. In the 20th century alone, governments were responsible for 260 million deaths worldwide. That number is greater than all deaths from illicit drug use, STDs, homicides, and traffic accidents throughout the last 100 years combined. And this is who we want to have all the guns. What happened in Las Vegas and in Florida was tragic and, naturally, good people want to prevent it from happening in the future, so they search for solutions. However, the reality is that disarming law-abiding decent citizens does nothing to stop the next crazed criminal from taking innocent lives. But what about Australia? They gave up their guns and shooting fatalities declined. On the surface, this is technically correct. Australia's anti-gun campaign and propaganda launched after a mass shooter killed 35 people in one heinous act of murder. The tragedy took place in 1996, in the city of Port Arthur. Following the crime, and in the wake of national agony, then Prime Minister John Howard moved to take back all the gun rights Australians had since the country's founding. The Port Arthur shooting was a tragic time for the Aussies. But the reality is that Australia never really had a mass shooting problem, and gun violence was on the decline before Port Arthur. Prior to Port Arthur, the worst mass shooting in recent history for Australians was the Coniston Massacre. At the Coniston Massacre, the government sanctioned the wholesale slaughter Indigenous Australians. More than 170 men, women, and children were gunned down in a state-approved act of mass murder. This was all legal. In 1996, the government took at least 650,000 guns, or about 1/5 of all guns in the country. Higher estimates put the numbers at 1 million and 1/3. Even with possession shaming, and amid the fear and threat of prosecution, Australians have yet to give up all their guns. It is estimated nearly 300,000 guns are still on the streets in the land down under. These guns don't belong to the law-abiding citizens either. In the United States, there are over 300 million firearms. An Aussie-style program would never work. Even if it was tried, it would lead to massive civil unrest, violence, arrests, and even civil war. Not to mention, as stated above, even if civil war were averted and Americans all turned in their guns, only the tyrannical state and the criminals would have guns. Say goodbye to freedom. So what is the solution? Well, the answer is not so black and white. However, statistically, even with record numbers of guns on the street, time appears to be the one element that lowers violent crimes. Even with the worst mass shooting in modern history happening in Las Vegas, if we look at the last 100 years in the US, violent crime is declining. According to official FBI and US Department of Justice reports, the rates of violent crime in the US are now at their lowest level in 40 years. Violent crime rates of 2015 were one-fourth the rates of 1993. Other countries are experiencing a similar decline. And, with the exception of 1 or 2 years, deaths of law enforcement officers reached their lowest in 50 years as well. In fact, right now, in our history as a human species, it is the safest time to be alive, not just in America either. All across the planet, despite your television saying otherwise, violence against other humans is declining. In the days of mass communication and massive technological leaps, people are able to shed stereotypes and fears far faster than would otherwise lead them to ignorant violence. Governments and mainstream media now have to implement extensive propaganda campaigns to sell society wars because the old they are bad technique is simply losing its effect. The warmongering powers that be have to resort to this propaganda because of those 300 million guns in the homes of law-abiding citizens. Because we are a well-armed society, the state cannot simply demand we acquiesce to their every desire. So, as you hear the president and other citizens call for gun control, or even if you feel the same urge, remember who benefits from it: the 1% who are the most violent humans left on the planet.
Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Tonight, what if the Constitution no longer applied? What if the whole purpose of the Constitution was to limit the government? What if Congress's enumerated powers in the Constitution no longer limited Congress, but were actually used as a justification to extend Congress's authority over every realm of human life? What if the president, meant to be an equal to Congress, has instead become a democratically elected, term-limited monarch? What if the president assumed that everything he did was legal just because he's the president? What if he could interrupt your regularly scheduled radio and TV programming for a special message from him? What if he could declare war on his own? What if he could read your emails and your texts without a search warrant? What if he could kill you without warning? What if Supreme Court justices no longer looked to the Constitution to determine the constitutionality of a law, but rather simply to what justices who preceded them thought about it? What if the rights and principles guaranteed in the Constitution have been so distorted in the past 200 years as to be unrecognizable by the founders? What if the 50 states were no longer sovereign entities, equals to each other, and parents of the federal government they voluntarily constituted? What if the states were mere provinces of a totally nationalized and fully centralized government? What if the Constitution was amended stealthily, not by constitutional amendments duly ratified by the states, but by the constant and persistent expansion of the federal government's role in our lives? What if the federal government decided if its own powers were proper and constitutional? What if the Constitution were no longer the supreme law of the land? What if you needed a license from the government to speak, to assemble, or to protest against the government? What if the government didn't like what you planned to say, and so it didn't give you the license? What if the right to keep and bear arms only applied to the government? What if posse comitatus, the federal law that prohibits our military from occupying our streets, were no longer in effect? What if the government considered the military an adequate dispenser of domestic law enforcement? What if cops looked and acted like troops and you couldn't distinguish the military from the police? What if you were not secure in your person, in your papers, and in your property? What if federal agents could write their own search warrants in defiance of the Constitution? What if the government could decide when you were and were not entitled to a jury trial? What if the government could take your property whenever it wanted? What if the government could continue prosecuting you until it got the verdict it wanted? What if the government could force you to testify against yourself, simply by labeling you a domestic terrorist? What if the government could torture you until you said what the government wanted to hear? What if people running for president actually supported torture? What if the government tortured your children to get to you? What if government judges and government lawyers intimidated juries into convicting the innocent? What if the government could send you to your death and your innocence meant nothing so long as the government's procedures were followed? What if America's prison population, the largest in the world, was a cruel and unusual way for a country to be free? What if half the prison population never harmed anyone but themselves? What if the people had no rights except those the government chose to let them have? What if the states had no rights except to do as the federal government commanded? What if our elected officials didn't really live among us, but instead all had their hearts and homes in Washington, D.C.? What if the government could strip you of your rights because of where your mother was when you were born? What if the income tax was unconstitutional? What if the states were convinced to give up their representation in Congress? What if the government tried to ban you from using a substance in your body that is older than the government itself? What if voting didn't mean anything anymore because both political parties stand for big government? What if the government could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event? The Constitution be damned. What if the government was the reason we don't have a Constitution anymore? What if you could love your country but hate what the government has done to it? What if sometimes to love your country you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if I'm right? What if the government is wrong? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
County. This is Charlotte County Cop Watch, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheeple up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Sheriff County Cop Watch with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me and I'm sick of it, so I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if some, if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave a, let's say, actually, yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But, do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where, at least I can do it. 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea too that we have is you know, if I got, you know, some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here, and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. You know, 47,000 of you so far right now. You know, $1 a day. I mean, $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head. Help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.